This is episode 58 of the Construction Leading Edge podcast. My name is Todd DeWalt. I am your host, and it's my job to help you grow your leadership skills, grow your business, and grow your income. This is the podcast for the small construction business owner. And let me ask you a question. How would you like to get some advice from someone who personally knew and worked with the likes of Henry Ford, Charles Schwab, John Rockefeller, Thomas Edison, Alexander Graham Bell, and Andrew Carnegie? Furthermore, how would you like to know what this individual thinks are the major attributes of leadership, as well as the major causes of failure in leadership? And beyond that, how would you like to hear the results of a study that was done that looked into why contractors fail? If you could find out why contractors fail, if you could learn the mistakes or learn from the mistakes of other contractors so you could apply those to your business, would that be helpful to you? Well, that's exactly what this podcast episode is all about. And that individual who worked with the likes of Henry Ford and Carnegie, his name is Napoleon Hill. He wrote a book called Think and Grow Rich, which I strongly recommend every one of you read. And we're going to talk about an excerpt. I'm going to go through an excerpt from his book, Think and Grow Rich. And we're going to talk about the 10 major causes of failure in leadership, as well as the major attributes of leadership, according to Napoleon Hill, from his experience spending 25 years studying successful business owners and leaders. And then I'm going to talk to you about some findings from a research study that was done by FMI. It was a 30 or 40 page article that I found, and I distilled it down. I'm going to go through a few of the more interesting points of that. And if you want to download, I've put together a brief version, kind of a boiled down, distilled version with the 15 red flags that a successful contractor may self-destruct. If you'd like to get your hands on that, instead of reading a 30 or 40 page article, if you'd like a 2-page boiled down version, you can go to constructionleadingedge.com/red flags. That's constructionleadingedge.com/red flags, no space, no dashes or anything like that. And put your information in, and I will send you not only the 2-page boiled down version with the 15 red flags that a successful contractor may self-destruct, but I'll also send you the link to the full article, which has a lot of really, really interesting information. So without further ado, let's jump into Napoleon Hill's major attributes of leadership. First, we'll start with a section on how leaders begin. So Napoleon Hill says, most leaders begin as followers. Broadly speaking, there are two types of people in this world. One type is known as leaders, the other as followers. Decide at the outset whether you intend to become a leader in your chosen calling or remain a follower. The difference in compensation is vast. The follower cannot reasonably expect the compensation to which a leader is entitled, although many followers make the mistake of expecting such pay. It's no disgrace to be a follower. On the other hand, it's no credit to remain a follower. Most great leaders begin in the capacity of followers. They became great leaders because they were intelligent followers. It's a very important point. With few exceptions, the man or woman who cannot follow a leader intelligently cannot become an efficient leader. The man or woman who can follow a leader most efficiently is usually the one who develops into leadership most rapidly. An intelligent follower has many advantages, among them the opportunity to acquire knowledge from his or her leader. Now, these are the major attributes of leadership. There are 11 of them. Number 1, unwavering courage based on knowledge of self and of one's occupation. No follower wishes to be dominated by a leader who lacks self-confidence and courage. No intelligent follower will be dominated by such a leader very long. Number 2, self-control. The leader who cannot control themselves can never control or influence others. Self-control sets a mighty example for one's followers, which the more intelligent will emulate. And I'll interject here, if you've ever worked for or reported to someone who doesn't have self-control, you can empathize with that statement. Number 3, the third major attribute of leadership is that good leaders have a keen sense of justice. Without a sense of fairness and justice, no leader can command and retain the respect of her followers. Number 4, definiteness of decision. The leader who wavers in their decisions shows that they are not sure of themselves, cannot lead others successfully. It is incredibly important to be decisive. Be decisive. And I've got a podcast episode on keys for decision making. You can find that. It gives you some protocol and some steps you can follow to make you a better decision maker. Number 5, definiteness of plans. The successful leader must plan his work and work his plan. A leader who moves by guesswork without practical, definite plans is comparable to a ship without a rudder. Sooner or later, he will land on the rocks. Major attribute of leadership, number 6, the habit of doing more than paid for. I like this one. One of the penalties of leadership is the necessity of willingness upon the part of the leader to do more than he requires of his followers. This is good advice. Some advice I heard that will help you get repeat customers and help you get a raise, help you get promoted is always do more than you're getting paid for. You can't go wrong doing that. Attribute number 7, a pleasing personality. No slovenly, careless person can become a successful leader. Leadership calls for respect. Followers will not respect the leader who does not grade high on all of the factors of a pleasing personality. Number 8, sympathy and understanding. The successful leader must be in sympathy with his followers. Moreover, he must understand them and their problems. Another way to talk about this would be to refer to it as emotional intelligence, or to have a high EQ. And if you haven't listened to the podcast episode where I interviewed Brent Darnell, I strongly recommend you go back and listen to that one from a couple of years ago. Brent is a master of EQ. He specializes in developing emotional intelligence in contractors, and lots of good information there. Major attribute number 9, mastery of detail. Successful leadership calls for mastery of the details of the leader's position. And I think this is something that gets lost a little bit in corporate America these days, the lack of attention to detail. Number 10, willingness to assume full responsibility or ownership. The successful leader must be willing to assume responsibility for the mistakes and the shortcomings, not only of himself, but of his followers. If he tries to shift this responsibility, he will not remain the leader. If one of his followers makes a mistake and shows himself incompetent, the leader must consider that it is he who failed. I read a great book recently called Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, 2 former Navy SEALs who were in the war on terror in Afghanistan and were involved in some of the most fierce fighting in Ramadi. And they talk about extreme ownership, owning it, not blaming anybody else, not blaming the conditions, not blaming your subordinates, but complete ownership, and it transformed the way that their unit was able to operate. All right, last major attribute of leadership, number 11, cooperation. The successful leader must understand and apply the principle of cooperative effort and be able to induce his or her followers to do the same. Leadership calls for power, and power calls for cooperation. All right, now let's talk about the 10 major causes of failure in leadership, according, again, to the experience of Napoleon Hill, who spent a quarter of a century working with some of the titans of industry. So he says, we come now to the major faults of leaders who fail, because it is just as essential to know what not to do as it is to know what to do. So, major cause of failure in leadership, number 1, inability to organize details. Efficient leadership calls for the ability to organize and to master details. No genuine leader is ever, quote, too busy to do anything which may be required of him in his capacity as leader. When a man, whether he is leader or follower, admits that he is too busy to change his plans or to give attention to any emergency, he admits his inefficiency. The successful leader must be the master of all details connected with his position. That means, of course, that he must acquire the habit of relegating details to capable lieutenants. Major cause of failure number 2, unwillingness to render humble service. Truly great leaders are willing, when occasion demands, to perform any sort of labor which they would ask another to perform. The greatest among ye shall be the servant of all, is a truth which all able leaders observe and respect. This is consistent, even though this book was written 50 years ago, this is consistent with servant-based leadership. And if you've listened to this podcast, you know that I'm a big fan and a believer in servant-based leadership. A lot of these successful business owners and leaders whom I've interviewed on this show are also firm believers and successful in servant-based leadership because it is the only form of leadership that works. Major cause of failure number 3, the expectation of pay for what they know instead of what they do with that which they know. The world does not pay men for that which they know. It pays them for what they do or they induce others to do. Number 4, this is a big one in larger companies and corporations. Fear of competition from followers. The leader who fears that one of his or her followers may take his position is practically sure to realize that fear sooner or later. The able leader trains understudies to whom he or she may delegate at will any of the details of his or her position. Only in this way may a leader multiply themselves and prepare themselves to be at many places and give attention to many things at one time. It is an eternal truth that men receive more pay for their ability to get others to perform than they could possibly earn by their own efforts. An efficient leader may, through his or her knowledge of his job and the magnetism of their personality, greatly increase the efficiency of others and induce them to render more service and better service than they could ever render without their aid. I've run into this, and I would guess some of you have probably run into this as well, where you've been around an insecure leader who was threatened by a high performer that reported to them. Number 5, lack of imagination. Without imagination, the leader is incapable of meeting emergencies and of creating plans by which to guide their followers efficiently. You must be imaginative and you must be quick thinking. Number 6, selfishness. The leader who claims all the honor for the work of his followers is sure to be met by resentment. The really great leader claims none of the honors. He is contented to see the honors, when there are any, go to his followers because he knows that most men will work harder for commendation and recognition than they will for money alone. I have a video that I found. You can find it at constructionleadingedge.com/motivation. Daniel Pink talks about the science of motivation and how people are actually motivated. And it's surprising in some cases how commendation or appreciation has more effect than money. But it's very important for leaders to be selfless. Selfish leaders typically end up in failure. Number 7, intemperance. Followers do not respect an intemperate leader. Moreover, intemperance in any of its forms destroys the endurance and the vitality of all who indulge in it. Number 8, disloyalty. The author says, perhaps this should have come at the head of the list. The leader who is not loyal to his trust and to his associates, those above him and those below him, cannot long maintain his leadership. Lack of loyalty is one of the major causes of failure in every walk of life. Number 9, the emphasis of the authority of leadership. The efficient leader leads by encouraging and not by trying to instill fear in the hearts of his followers. Have you ever worked with an intimidating leader who wanted to show their title or make sure that you knew that they were the fill-in-the-blank vice president, president, CEO, etc.? You probably have been around them. The leader who tries to impress his followers with his, quote, authority comes within the category of leadership through force. If a leader is a real leader, he will have no need to advertise that fact except by his conduct. His sympathy is understanding, fairness, and a demonstration that he knows the job. I heard there was a person that I worked with. They were managing projects, and I heard one of my colleagues talking about them, and they told me that when they were on a job site, they were constantly telling people that they were in charge, that they were the project manager, and that they were in charge, although everybody on the site was going to someone else for answers. And I said, if you have to tell people you're in charge, then you're not in charge. If you have to tell people you're the leader, then you are not, in fact, the leader. Lastly, number 10, the emphasis of title. This is a good one. It sort of goes along with number 9, the emphasis of title. The competent leader requires no title to give them the respect of their followers. The man who makes too much over his title generally has little else to emphasize. Let me say that again. The man or woman who makes too much over their title generally has little else to emphasize. There you go. These are some of the more common of the causes. These are among the more common of the causes of failure in leadership. Any one of these faults is sufficient to induce failure. Study this list carefully if you aspire to leadership, and make sure that you are free of these faults. So before I go any further, I'll tell you, I will have notes and links to the major attributes of leadership and the common causes of failure in the show notes for this episode at constructionleadingedge.com/058, since this is episode 58. So you can find that information there. Now, let's talk about specifically why contractors fail. We've talked about why leaders fail, but let's talk about why contractors fail. Because if you're a construction business owner and you could look down the road and look into the future and see what those red flags are see the red flags that have been identified through research done by surety companies, insurance companies, consultants, experts, you would probably want to have that information. I know I certainly would. So I found this article, found this study that was done, and I'm going to go over a few talking points. And again, if you want to get the distilled, boiled down version of the 15 red flags that a successful contractor is about to self-destruct or may self-destruct, go to constructionleadingedge.com/red flags. So let me go through some of this information for you. And this is important if you are a construction business owner, and it's also important if you work for a contractor, because you need to be able to look around and look through this list of red flags and then look around your organization, whether you own it or not, to see, is my company exhibiting some of these red flags? If so, you may want to get off the ship before it sinks. All right, here we go. Again, this study was completed by the FMI Corporation, and they asked the question, what causes large and historically successful contractors to self-destruct? The industry has regularly witnessed smart leaders making what appear to be the same fatal mistakes others have made before them. Following is an excerpt from the FMI Quarterly found on fminet.com, and a link to the article is available at the you can get that when you download the 15 red flags at the link I mentioned previously. So we're going to talk about a few different areas. We'll talk about what their research found out about culture and the systems of the organization, about the mind of the contractor, which was really fascinating, as well as excessive ego. So let's start with the connection between failure and the culture and systems of the organization. And I'll read from this report. In our research, we found that the culture and systems of the organization played an important role in a construction firm's downfall. Under this general category are several issues in management areas. The first one they discuss is the lack of financial discipline. The lack of financial discipline generally means the business is not being managed like a real business. I've said this a lot before. Some contractors are just not good business people. They're good builders, but they don't give the financial side of the business the attention it deserves. For example, at some firms, the financial people aren't even involved in decision making. Instead, they're relegated to bookkeeper status, with the thinking that the only real work of a construction business is construction. That sounds all too familiar, doesn't it? Succession planning is often missing or mismanaged in the construction industry. This makes it a particularly precarious time when, for example, the longtime leader or founder is ready to leave the business, or when unforeseen circumstances cause a sudden leadership change. Similar concerns occur in transitions that involve subsequent generations as well, when children or grandchildren move up into the organization, move into a leadership role. Ensuring that a strong leader is replaced with another strong leader when the time is right assures the continuity of the business and future growth. This does not happen often enough in the construction industry. So what does that mean? If you're a construction business owner and you're either planning an exit, either by selling the business, or you want to retire at some point, that means you have to have a succession plan. Who is going to succeed you? Because if your business doesn't go on without you, you don't own a business, you own a job. And you need to have some way to make your business live on past you. All right, back to the study. A poor project/owner/customer selection process ties back to the project timing and hard bid process that causes contractor failure outlined above. Here's a key finding. Many contractors do not have a well-defined process for making a go or no-go decision when deciding whether to take on a project. Let me say that again. Many contractors do not have a well-defined process for making a go, no-go decision when deciding whether or not to take a project. The reality is, in a highly competitive business, one bad project can mean an unprofitable year, or worse, and one unprofitable year can mean failure. Next, innovation. Failure of the innovation process usually indicates that there is no innovation process. There's often a sense that construction is a business that never changes. If that was ever true, it isn't anymore. Innovation is required to win the work and build it profitably. Innovation is very important. So if you're a construction business owner, you need to think about, how are you innovating? If you're doing the same thing you did 15 years ago, you are not innovating. Next, strategic planning. Strategic planning that is not strategic is another way to enter what they call the failure chain reaction model. The researchers found that many construction companies do strategic planning, but they don't have very good strategies. They tend to be so caught up in the process that they forget that their task is really to determine what kind of company they are and where the company should be headed. Instead, their strategic planning, quote, becomes an operational fix-it list. They're not operating strategically. They're too far in the weeds when they need to be up at the 30,000 foot level and determining, what kind of business are we? What do we do well? What don't we do? And then focusing on what they do and avoiding what they don't do well. All right, so those are the culture and systems of the organization. Next, what I think is very interesting is the mind of the contractor. One of the most surprising and perhaps most interesting results of our research is a greater understanding of the role played by what we call, quote, the mind of the contractor. After reviewing our research, we wondered if we could identify certain mentalities that also increase a company's probability for running into trouble. We found that some of the characteristics that contributed to the success of an individual leader also contributed to the company's collapse. Let me say that again. They found that some of the characteristics that contributed to the success of an individual leader also contributed to the company's collapse. Here's a list of some of those characteristics potentially leading to construction company failure. 1, driven to grow. 2, numb to risk. 3, hyper-optimistic, overly optimistic, maybe even naive. Overconfident, afraid of layoffs, action-oriented, project manager versus CEO, and feast or famine. So again, if you think about this list, driven to grow, numb to risk, hyper-optimistic, overconfident, afraid of layoffs, action-oriented, project manager versus CEO, and having a feast or famine mentality, those are factors that contributed to individual leadership success, but also contributed to business failure. These attributes are a double-edged sword. I've had this conversation with a few of you. It's a double-edged sword. It's not your weakness that will take you down. It's a strength that is mismanaged. Since all the items on the list are psychological factors, a broad range of interpretations can be drawn. The research included our own consultants' experience working with contractors, as well as interviews and comparative results from accepted personality tests. Generally, if you're a contractor or you know those who lead or own a construction firm, most characteristics on this list will ring familiar. So think about it. If you're a contractor, then think about these attributes. Or think if you work for a contractor. Think about these attributes. Driven to grow, numb to risk, overly optimistic, really confident, action-oriented, feast or famine approach, more of a PM versus CEO. I would say those sound familiar. Most contractors are by nature driven to grow their business. They want to build the biggest job or perform the most volume. As a guy that I worked with used to say, he was always looking for the home run. They readily buy into the, quote, if you're not growing, you're dying mentality. If the firm is a public firm, the market expects it to grow. Part of that expectation is the belief that profits will grow along with revenues. But in construction, this result is not often the case. Contractors are also by nature action-oriented. They're rapid decision makers who sometimes act too quickly when a more deliberate approach is needed. Most leaders in the industry came from the operations side of the business. Most were former project managers or superintendents. While this is a critical background for a construction executive, the CEO's job, listen to this, the CEO's job is to run the business, not the projects. Some leaders never make this transition. If you think back to the interview with Randy Hall, CEO of Batson Cook, he talked a lot about this transition from operations to CEO, moving from a PM mentality to the CEO mentality. Strongly recommend you go back and listen to that if that's you. If you're a business owner and you can see yourself as being too much of a PM, or if you want to make the transition from operations to CEO, go listen to Randy Hall's advice. Great stuff. A project focus to the business can lead to a feast or famine mentality. Getting the next project and building the backlog seems to overshadow all other considerations, frequently leading to taking the wrong job for the wrong reasons. So there you go. There's the mind of the contractor. Third, excessive ego. The interviews we conducted indicated that in 62% of the company failure cases, ego-related issues were a crucial element in the actions that led up to the disaster. In 62% of the business failure cases they studied, ego was a crucial element that led to the disaster. Here's a quote from one of the researchers. Ego-driven people scare me the most. In this business, pride and ignorance go together. And experience and humility go together. If you've been around construction long enough, you have failed and been humbled. If you're prideful and arrogant in construction, you simply have not been hit yet. So if you've been around long enough, you've failed and you've been humbled. If you're prideful and arrogant, if that's you, if you think you're 10 feet tall and bulletproof, then you simply haven't been hit yet. And if you've been in the business long enough, you're probably shaking your head right now. The concept of excessive ego embodies a constellation of attitudes and beliefs that in many ways point to a leader's ability to succeed. However, these same attitudes can often be identified as the root causes leading to company failure. The concept of a two-edged sword could not be more applicable here. So on one side of the sword, pride, arrogance, overoptimism, and blindness to realities are often characteristics of a leader who fails to develop a team or seek candid feedback. Such leaders may also develop a sense of invincibility. There are many ways in which an excessive ego can distort reality, leading to misperceptions concerning the market, the company's capabilities, the leader's personal needs, any of which can put your firm at a much greater risk of failure. When we asked managers and executives of construction firms across the nation to select the statements that best describe their culture of their company, the responses from companies that are experiencing financial crisis displayed high ego attitudes more frequently than firms with lower risk. Let me say that again. The companies that experienced financial crisis had a culture of high ego, invincibility, pride, arrogance, more frequently than firms with lower risk. Here are several statements that they correlated to financial crisis. Quote, we'll figure out how to staff it once we get the job. Companies where that was part of the culture had a 75% rate of financial crisis. Next statement, quote, we have to keep our guys busy. That was associated with companies who had a 55% failure rate. The next one, just put more guys on it, had a a failure rate of 45%. So 45% of the companies who said that their culture said, just put more guys on it, ended up in financial crisis. So there you go. That's just a short excerpt of this study about why contractors fail. Again, if you're a business owner, then you need to download this 2-page report that has the 15 red flags. You need to assess yourself and assess your business to see, are you exhibiting the red flags? Are you showing the symptoms of a contractor that is headed for self-destruction? So if that's you, you need to go to constructionleadingedge.com/red flags. Put your information in there. I will email you the report. There will also be a link at the bottom of that report so you can read the entire article. And I would encourage you, read the entire article. There's more information about that, about more of their findings, about strategic planning and some of the uncontrollable factors, and there's just 20 more pages of stuff that you need to know about. You owe it to yourself, you owe it to your business to do an assessment. This is like a colonoscopy for your business. All right, it's uncomfortable, nobody likes it, but you need to be big boys and girls and take a good hard look, read this article, use this research, look in the mirror, see where the problems are, and then go solve those problems. So go to constructionleadingedge.com/red flags. I'll send you that report and you can get started with your business colonoscopy. All right, well, that wraps this up. One last thing I want to tell you about: if you are a construction business owner and you want to take your business to the next level, you want to become a better leader, you know you need to get better at the financial side of it, the people side of it, you want to get your cash flow under control, I have set up the Advanced Construction Leadership Community, or the ACLC for short, just for that reason. I had a construction business for several years. I had to close it down because of a lot of the reasons that I just mentioned in this report. A lot of these things rang true with me. And since then, I have gone about figuring out ways to solve those problems. I have strategies to solve cash flow problems. I have strategies to deal with people, strategies for hiring and firing and dealing with conflict resolution, all the things that kicked my butt when I had my own business. And I applied those strategies to grow a business from 20 employees to 50 employees, from about $4 million in revenue up to $10 million in revenue over the course of 3 years. And they work, and I want to share that information with you. So go to constructionleadingedge.com/community to learn how the ACLC can help you take your construction business to the next level. That puts this one in the bag. Thanks for listening. Don't forget, go to constructionleadingedge.com/058 for the notes and links and all the other good stuff that I mentioned here. And I will see you next time. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.